So you can see the hands coming down to open it, and of course the hands do not operate that way. The accuracy of the actual model is really quite bad. My name's Dr. Dave Hone. I'm a paleontologist at Queen Mary University of London. I've been working on dinosaurs for about 20 years now. Today we're going to look at dinosaur attacks from the Jurassic Park movies and judge how real they are. Something like Gallimimus would evade a predator simply through pure speed. So this is one of the ones where for its time it's pretty good, but it's increasingly got dated. We now are very confident that the ornithomimosaurs as a whole would have been feathered. One thing I've noticed actually this time around is that they have a tendency for the feet to run parallel to one another, and they should actually start to swing into the midline as they take each step. You can see that from the footprints of these animals when they move at high speed. I think this has come from the animators. I've seen the footage. They're literally running around in the parking lot and they videoed that and then used that to build the animal models, but we don't run quite the same way that dinosaurs do. So it's a very human-like running action and not quite a dinosaur-like running action. T-Rex was definitely an active hunter. The idea that it was just some kind of scavenger and couldn't hunt isn't true at all. It was hunting far more like a wolf than something like a cheetah. T-Rex is an efficient mover over long distances, so it's far more likely to just be wearing stuff down by just having a decent turn of speed that it can hold for a very long period of time.
Bet you never look at birds the same way again.
Just using the power bite that T-Rex has got is what you need to kill stuff. This is a T-Rex tooth. This is the root, so this would sit inside the jaw, but this is the crown sticking out in the mouth, which can then go into what it's trying to bite. And you can see that it's sharp, but it's also very, very thick and very, very strong. This will puncture through bone. I really do like the way it feeds, actually. That's something that we do have a much better handle on, and this is directly linked to what modern birds do. It's pinning the thing down with its foot and then coming in with the head and pulling back. And that's what you'll see loads of birds do, but also we've now got analyses of the muscle structure to show that this actually is probably how they dismembered carcasses. I'd give this one something like a 7.
Must go faster.
It's not a great representation of a T-Rex. If you look at what our understanding of the animal was at the time, it's pretty good, but there's a few things with the shape and structure of the head and where the eyes sit that aren't great, and our modern interpretation would definitely streamline that a bit. It would be a bit less gnarly. And in particular would have lips covering the teeth, so it would not have the crocodile-like overbite. Wood does not shatter on impact from blunt force. That's not how wood works. It's never going to be able to like shatter a tree as it runs through it. It's far more likely to break its legs. A bunch of the big carnivores have relatively strong heads, and Tyrannosaurus is one of them, and it's actually been suggested that they might have fought one another, at least in part, by smashing their heads into them. So it's totally something I can see it doing with a car like this. It may not be able to bite it very easily. It could presumably hit it with its head. We only have vague estimates as to how quick these animals could really be. It is almost certainly moving way too fast in this clip to be even close to catching a Jeep. Footprints will give you an idea of the size of the foot, which will actually give you a good idea of the size of the animal, and then how far apart they are as its stride length, and then how quick it might be moving. But nowadays we'll also do complete muscle reconstructions, working out where all the muscles go on the animal, how big and heavy it was, how much power they can generate, and therefore how many steps they can take, and get an idea of how quick they are from that. I'd give this clip a 4. T-Rex is nothing like that fast. It would never be able to burst through a tree like that. It would just break its leg. This isn't really going to happen. So the first problem they've got is that Velociraptor is really not that big at all. So even reaching up to a human height door handle is going to be a challenge for them. So you can see the hands coming down to open it, and of course the hands do not operate that way. They could absolutely do that because the whole point of that claw being hinged up is it's like a cat claw. It is retracted, so it's held free from the ground. So as you walk around and just normally walking and gripping the ground, you're not abrading the tip of the claw. So you're keeping it super, super sharp. You don't want to tap your claw all the time and give away where you are and what you're doing, and you're blunting the thing you've designed or sort of evolved to keep as sharp as possible. Those aren't very big strides. The name Velociraptor means speedy thief or speedy robber. They were quite quick, but they're quite quick for very small animals. They're not, again, they're not super sprinters. I'd give this clip something like a 6, because the way it's hunting is really, really accurate. The accuracy of the actual model is really quite bad. And again, even for the time, even if you ignore the feathers, it's just 2.5 times the size it should be. So that dog-like grabbing something and shaking it, I mean, maybe they could do it, but they certainly don't have any of the kind of specializations to do that from the muscles. And from what we see from the bites we have from T-Rex, from what we think are failed attacks where the animal has survived because we can see healing on the bones afterwards, they're just simply taking one big bite out of things. So the bite power on the jaws and the strength of the teeth means they can just bite through, you know, even very, very large, thick bones. Velociraptor attacking a T-Rex, even at this scale in the movie, this is like a badger taking on a grizzly bear. You know, it's not going to end well. There is no way on earth they would attack something that size. So they're going to be taking, again, for real-world Velociraptor-sized stuff, they're going to be taking rabbit-sized or hare-sized or badger-sized prey. They are taking relatively small things that they're capable of completely overpowering with their size. We don't really know what dinosaurs sounded like. There's a bunch of ideas we can put on the table because what do we know what things like crocodilians, the kind of noises that they make and how they produce them. It's things more like ostriches and actually things like chicken and ducks that make relatively simple sounds is what dinosaurs are going to be limited to. The roar is absolutely fine. That deep-bodied whole roar kind of noise is absolutely something a bunch of crocodiles already do. So there's no reason to think big dinosaurs couldn't do it. Whether or not they did do it is another question entirely. I'm going to have to give it like a 3. There's the way they attack. They just wouldn't attack anything like that. They screech before you attack and alert the enemy. I think overall I'd give the original Jurassic Park something like a 7 for realism. If you remember what we knew at the time and what we had solid information on, it's actually still pretty good. So the adult Stegosaurus are really very good. I think they're one of the best overall models in the entire franchise, except they're really too big. Not quite as bad as Velociraptor, but they should be about 2/3 of that size. Just don't think they're very quick. It's not their size that makes them slow, it's their build. Like they're really weirdly back leg heavy. So they've got giant back legs, but their front legs are really quite small. The back legs are going to drive a lot of power, but the front legs are not going to provide much speed at all for a very big animal. I am not very quick, but I think I'd fancy my chances running away from one. I think if there was a big tree I could get behind, I think that would be your best bet. Tail spikes are obviously going to be used to stab something. The question is what? Because the obvious interpretation is this is an anti-predator defense and it's to fight off potential carnivores. But babies are much more vulnerable to carnivores than adults, and the babies don't have them. So it's more than a strong possibility that these are actually primarily used for fighting other Stegosaurus. The plates on Stegosaurus are one of those things that have been debated pretty much since it was first discovered, but I think we're increasingly coming round to the idea that these are basically display structures. They're often argued to be armor. They're not armor. They're not going to protect you. They don't protect your flanks or your head. With a rotten log like that, I'm absolutely sure the tail can go straight through it. What I'm less clear about is, like, it's got to rotate the tail right the way over to bring those spikes down, and the tail is fairly stiff. That, sweeping sideways is one thing, but like coming over the top, I really doubt they could do that. I'd give this clip about an 8. Other than the tail like flipping over and them being a bit too big, this is a really accurate depiction of probably how they defended themselves. So those are massively overly shrunk down. The original Compsognathus is about this big, with a head like this, and then we know that's a juvenile from the bone texture, so it would probably be an animal maybe this big. So, not like that. This is the opposite of the Velociraptor problem. This is a third or a quarter of the size it should be. So how on earth you'd begin to piece together some kind of group hunting is impossible, and indeed the Compsognathus fossil that we have has the bones of a lizard inside it, showing what it was last eating. So yeah, it's a generalized predator of small prey. Compsognathus, the real one, has a rather bigger head and rather bigger teeth than the model used here. But its head would be comparable to that of something like a modern house cat or a mid-sized monitor lizard or something like that, and they're more than capable of breaking the skin and giving you a very nasty bite. So yeah, that bit at least is vaguely realistic. He struggles to pick up a single one. They weigh about a pound each. Just roll around on the floor and crush them. I'm gonna have to give this clip something like a 3. But the idea that these tiny dinosaurs would just swarm over something human-sized, particularly something that they already know is a threat and can hurt them, is really unrealistic.
Don't move! Don't move! Don't run!
The whole T-Rex's vision based on movement is a nonsense built on a nonsense. It's just not true whatsoever. Standing still might be quite good because everyone running away is probably a bigger distraction, but I still probably wouldn't want to try it. T-Rex would have had pretty thick skin, but it's not going to be some kind of like armor that you can't penetrate with something like, a well-powered dart of something like this with the right pneumatic weapon. I'm sure that would go straight into it. I imagine something like a rhino, which really does have kind of thickened skin, is probably going to have as thick as or similar levels of protection. Give it about a 7. The models are really nice and the way they move is really good. I think I'd probably give the Lost World overall a 7. The Stegosaurus is really good, and just generally how they move and how they act is pretty cool. Pteranodon was not picking up people with its feet. Their feet are, or indeed pterosaur feet as a whole, are structured really very similarly to ours. So if you try and pick up something big, like a dog, with your feet, you are not going to be able to manage it with your toes. They don't have gripping feet or claws or anything like a bird of prey whatsoever, so it's now trying to lift double its mass. That would also compromise the way that it would fly. They're not doing anything like this at all. These are beak-feeding animals. They're much more like your average bird in that regard, flying down, grabbing something as it flies past. Well, they could probably fly out of the egg. Pterosaurs, we think, were what we call hyperprecocial. They are effectively active and functioning animals from the minute they hatch, or at least within a couple of hours or a couple of days, they could probably get up, run around, and even fly. So a nest like this with babies in it long term is not how we think they're reproducing. Really very large animals indeed. But pterosaurs are very lightweight. Even an animal this size would weigh less than a human, like 50 kilos. They're not very heavy at all, despite their huge size. The way they move on the ground in this is really, really accurate. This is how we think they walked. They were quadrupeds. They're walking on their hands and their feet like a really kind of giant upright bat. It's pretty much the only way you can realistically articulate the limbs to get them to stand and get them to walk. Really definitively, we have trackways and footprints that show them walking on all fours, and they have very distinctive shaped feet and hands. I'd give this one about a 5. They're really, really accurate and very, very good. But the way they act and behave is really unrealistic. I'm a Jurassic Park 3 semi-fan. I think it's a far, far better film than most people think it is. And some of the models are very, very good and very well done and move much more realistically and act much better than we've actually seen in the previous films. But there are some really clunky bits to it as well. So I'd probably give it a 6 overall. Ankylosaurs, they can absolutely hit big carnivorous dinosaurs with their tail clubs. It would have been something they could defend themselves with, but that's almost certainly not why they evolved. The actual armor and the club itself probably primarily evolved to fight other ankylosaurs. This is a display of dominance, this is competing for territory or for mates or things like this, and that's why they're built like that. It's just a kind of bonus that they can then use it to defend themselves from predators. So the structure of the tail is such that you've got like the actual club, then you have what's called the handle, so this big long strip of really stiff and rigid bone, and then the main muscles there will pull the tail side to side. So it could probably move up and down a bit, but this is fundamentally a thing that swings side to side. And indeed, you know, the club kind of reaches a kind of slight side point. That's what you want to be swinging into your opponent, not hitting it with the flat of the underside. It's not a great representation of the tail. The whole tail appears to be flexible, so it doesn't appear to have the handle in there at all. And then the way it would carry it as a result of that is wrong. Indominus Rex flips it over, but then kills it by biting the armoured head, not the completely unarmoured rest of the entire dinosaur. The head of an ankylosaur is a solid block of bone. Like, they even have a bony plate that sits on the eyelid, so when they close the eye, they have an eye shield. That's not the bit to bite. Giving this a 2, like, no part of this is really very realistic or convincing or accurate. Dimorphodon is particularly characterized by being like really short and blocky and kind of robust. The list of things wrong with that model starts at the tip of the nose and ends at the tip of the tail. It's f***ing dreadful. The fingers are in the wrong orientation, the leg shape is wrong, the wing shape is wrong, it's got the wrong number of toes, it's got these gripping feet which pterosaurs don't have, the tail is far too flexible and it looks like it's too long. As a predator, you're catching very small things with very quick reaction times. You need to be able to snap your jaws very quickly in order to be able to grab them and kill them. Velociraptor has something very similar. You have this real trade-off between speed and power, and they have gone for speed. You can see where the model starts going wrong with Dimorphodon in the teeth, because Dimorphodon literally means 2 types of teeth. And yet in this film it has 1 type of tooth. So that's not a great start. It should have a few of those fangs at the front, and then behind it should have a row of much, much smaller little teeth. We think it's a generalized small predator, so it's biting and killing, you know, rats and lizards and that sort of thing, killing them with those sharp teeth, breaking them up with those smaller teeth behind, and then swallowing them. I'll give it a 1 because you won't let me give it 0. There is nothing to like about this clip as a pterosaur researcher, other than it's got pterosaurs in it. For the first Jurassic World movie, it's a significant downgrade on the earlier ones. Most of the models are nothing like as good as you had even 20 years ago, so I'm going to give it a 5. Baryonyx is a really cool, weird, interesting dinosaur. It would have been lovely to see something that's far less generic, or at least rather different to what we've seen from things like T-Rex, which we've seen so many times before. So it's a relative of Spinosaurus, which have these very, very long and narrow jaws and do have a something like a crocodile appearance. But in this model here, they've squashed the head. That's not how the jaw articulations are built. There's no other dinosaur that can do something like that. I can't see why it'd particularly be beneficial. It's when you're trying to grab a fish. opening it to 90 degrees does not help you grab a fish. Worse, it means there's loads of water in the way when you're trying to do that fast bite. That is a big, strong animal. I think in a wrestling match for a chair, you're going to lose. This is not a dinosaur that is going to be able to climb up a ladder. The arms can't reach that far forward. They don't hook like that. The arms are big and strong, but not strong enough to lift the body. So Baryonyx are fundamentally fish eaters, so they're sticking their head into water and grabbing fish and eating them, but they also have these really strong arms with big claws, and to be honest, we're not very sure what they're doing with them. One possibility that I've suggested is that they're actually quite useful for digging things. They might be good at things like clawing into riverbanks, going after stuff like turtles and other things that might end up in the mud. I'd give this clip maybe a 4. It's a really interesting animal, and it's just a shame we don't really get to see it. Depending on your taxonomic interpretation, this is either a young Pachycephalosaurus or an adult Stygimoloch. I don't think it's going to get through that, but like a garden wall of one layer of bricks, yeah, I think they'd do it some real work. This is the skull of a little thing called Stegosaurus. This is part of the same group. This entire top half of the skull is solid bone, absolutely solid. And then on top of that, there'd be some kind of cap of keratin to a horn-like sheath on top of that as well. So literally half the head is bone. That is going to be a solid dome, maybe this big. On a neck that is relatively set to be rigid and absorb a lot of force. So this is absolutely an animal that can lower its head and then deliver a huge amount of power in a straight line. If that thing is capable of going through a brick wall and it gets a full impact in your chest, I think your rib cage is basically gone. I can't imagine anyone would survive an impact like that. I mean, people get killed from single hits from things like sheep and goats if they catch you wrong, and this animal is capable of delivering a lot more power. I guess I'd give this an 8. I think it's maybe a bit extreme with the way it's getting through the walls and the busting the lock open, but it's a really nice model, and it is an animal delivering a lot of power with its head. Overall, Fallen Kingdom, I'm not a fan. A lot of the models are not very good. A lot of the behaviors are not very good. I'd give it a 5. It's great that we're finally getting fully feathered dromaeosaurs, which should be fully feathered. The feathering is okay, but Pyroraptor is not a particularly big dromaeosaur. It's Velociraptor-ish sized again, and yet again it's been blown up to this giant animal.
No.
There were species that occupied Arctic environments which were not dissimilar to what we see now in northern Russia or Scandinavia or Canada or northern parts of the US or on mountainsides where it would have been cold for much of the year. But there's a difference between, surviving in cold conditions and diving and swimming in freezing water. There's an odd group of dromaeosaurs called the Halskaraptorines from Mongolia, and they are suggested to be quite good at swimming, but they are built rather differently. What you have here is an animal that's like swimming almost like a crocodile. Like its feathers are splayed out sideways, it's not paddling with its tail, and yet somehow moving at high speed. Pyroraptor's about as adapted for swimming as like a pigeon or a magpie. If you chuck it in the water, it's gonna thrash around and then drown. This is a 2. So, Therizinosaurus has these weird giant claws. That gives it its name, Scythe Lizard. And we really don't know quite what they're doing with them. Our best interpretation is that these were actually something like we see in the giant ground sloths that were around even a few tens of thousands of years ago. Reaching up, hooking on branches, pulling stuff down, separating leaves, and making them accessible. They're very, very unusual because although they're extremely long, they're also really quite thin. So they're not very strong. They would not be very good at, for example, stabbing through a Giganotosaurus and not just all snapping off. If you stab that into something and you hit something solid like a bone, which is very likely when stabbing another large dinosaur, the claw is going to break. I really like the model. The big three-way fight and the giant stabbing thing is really bad, like a 3. Dominion is really horribly unrealistic. So many of the models are not good. So many of the actions are not good. Some of the things that are going on just don't make sense or work well at all. I'd give it a 3. My favourite dinosaur from the Jurassic Park movies is the Stegosaurus from The Lost World, the second one. I think it's a great model, a really nice animal. I like the colour pattern, I like the design, I like the style of it. I generally like the way it behaves. I think it's really nice. More realistic dinosaurs, please. If you like this video, why not click on the next one?